Hi everyone, I'm Eric Farmer. I'm the somewhat leader of the writing group we have here at the library, and so I've been roped into hosting this open mic night again. Our group is a critique-based group. We meet twice a month, second Thursday and third Tuesday of the month. We do longer pieces on the Thursday meeting. We try to have them sent in by the first of the month, and our Tuesday meeting we do shorter pieces that we can take a red pen to in the course of a meeting. If you have any questions or would you like to submit to the group, we've got flyers in the back. There's also snacks and pretzels, and Mark's feelings will be very hurt if you don't eat them, so please dig in. Again, because they keep putting me in charge of this, I'm going to use my power and go first, and then after that we're just going to go down the list alphabetically and wander through everyone's pieces. Once again, I'm Eric Farmer. I am the leader of the group, and I have a degree in English literature, and that's all of the intro I really have. Sorry about that. Everyone else had to plan theirs ahead. I just wing it. All right, so I'm going to be reading from the young adult novel I'm working on. The premise right now is two characters, Bradley and Meghan. Bradley and Meghan have used magic to create a truth stone that Meghan has to figure out how it works. Bradley's offered to help her in exchange for asking her 20 questions using the truth stone, which makes anyone who's asked a question by it tell the truth. And here we are. Ready? He asked. Meghan nodded, swallowing the worry stuck in her throat. He took one hand off the steering wheel and held it out in front of her, palm open. Now? Meghan asked, but pulled the stone out of her pocket and dropped it in his hand. Is this really safe? You've got your seatbelt on, don't you? We'll be fine. I do. Meghan's mouth spat out the word before she could think, forced out by the magic, but then she grinned. That's one. What? That doesn't count, he said, his fingers closing around the rock. I said that's one, the magic made her say again. And now that's two. This is much easier than I thought it would be. Bradley opened his mouth but snapped it shut again before he could speak, clamping down the words before he could form another wasted question. He closed his hand back around the steering wheel, the rock in his palm pressed against the ripped-up leather cover. He actually focused on the road for a minute, his eyebrows furrowed. This is harder than I thought, he finally admitted. Meghan just grinned. Bradley carefully placed the rock in the cup holder before asking him another question. So where to? Meghan sighed, sad that she wouldn't be able to drop another question off the tally. I don't know. You're the one who asked, so I figured you knew. Bradley looked down at the stone again, making sure it was safely out of reach and not touching him at all. He was getting cautious after getting burned twice. Do I look like someone who makes plans? Meghan just looked at him for a moment. No, I suppose not. How about your place? The thought of her dad's meeting Bradley for the first time was not an appealing one. She'd never brought a boy home before, and she didn't want to lead off with this. It wouldn't be setting a good precedent. We'll call that Plan C. What's Plan A? I'll let you know when we get there. You're useless, Burke. Anyone ever tell you that? Or are you embarrassed of me? Yes. No, I just don't like hiding things from my dads. And what am I supposed to say when they ask me what we're going to be doing? The truth, that we're going to be making out like rabbits. Don't be fucking gross, Bradley. We're definitely not making out. Bradley's eyes shifted down to the cup holder and grabbed the rock out before Meghan could stop him. She wasn't fast enough, and she banged her fingers on the dash. He pinched it between his thumb and forefinger and held it between them while Meghan seethed. Are we going to make out? A familiar heaviness returned to Meghan's mouth, but she refused to take her eyes off the stone as the silver flash returned. Her cheeks flushed as she answered. Maybe at some point, but definitely not today, and definitely not until you stop being such a douchebag. Bradley grinned. Fair enough. You are such an ass. That's 3. You haven't seen ass yet. What were you and Olivia whispering about before you got in the car? She wanted to know if we were going out. Bradley's foot slipped, and they accelerated for a moment before he got the car under control, barely missing a passing postman. Seriously, he asked. Yes, Meghan answered. And if you promise not to tell her I told you that, and never bring it up again, you can go to my house. Deal. What did you tell her? Not even slightly. If you ask me any more awkward questions, the deal's off and you can fuck off. Fine, be weird about it. I'm not weird, you're weird. And that's 6. That's good for now. As you can see, I try to keep it nice and short. We're going to try and limit everyone to about 5 minutes. We're not going to be hard and fast about it, but if you hear the timer go off, as it will in 3, 2, 1, it'll get louder. There we go. Try and wrap up as soon as possible, and let the next person go. We have about 15 people going tonight, so move along as quickly as you can. So we're going to start off with Carolyn Pott. Carolyn has been a writer for the Yale University, for an international training and freelance writing editor for 3 decades, for individuals, organizations, professors, physicians, and authors. As a proponent of humane treatment of animals, Carolyn is a co-founder of www.untoldanimalstories.org. She's also a creative writer, formerly of short stories and currently a novel. Carolyn.
This is an excerpt from the novel that I finished, but I keep tweaking while I'm attempting to get it published. So it's kind of in the middle of it. So we'll just see if you can handle that. Kilken Village is in Wales, northern Wales. On my 4th night, the main character is a woman named Maddie. On my 4th night in Kilken Village, as I sat in my customary place by the fire, the door opened. A tall, bearded man came in, nodded, and said a friendly hi to everyone, an American. He walked up to the bar, ordered an ale and a plowman's plate, then strode over to the fire. I studied him. He looked familiar, but that was unlikely. Then he turned to me, and both our faces registered recognition. Maddie? Tucker, is that you? You're alive. He laughed and nodded. I am indeed. What brings you here? I detected a slight English accent. I could ask you the same. I motioned toward the empty chair at my table. He sat. Am I going too quickly or not loudly enough?
A little bit louder.
A little bit louder, okay. He sat, stretching his legs out before him. I've been living in England for 10 years or so now, in Chester with my family. It's just over the border of Wales. From time to time, I go on soloing backpacking trips in Snowdonia. He cocked his thumb toward the west. My wife and I share many an interest, but backpacking is not one of them. She has the good grace to push me out the door from time to time to do what I love. And you? I live in Colorado with my husband. I'm over here for 10 days, visiting friends in Bath, and then here, because I'd heard it was beautiful. I've been walking every day. Your husband is here as well? No, he had no interest in coming. Your wife, is she English? She is. We met in Alaska. You were headed there when I met you. I was. And you went, and you lived. I did. I was in college when Tucker and I had met. I was sitting on the porch railing watching the sunset when he walked out and perched beside me. Together we watched the sun sink behind the mountains and then started talking. I liked him immediately, though not in a woman-man kind of way. He was open and approachable, gaunt, but his eyes were lively. I had said, "You don't go to school here." "No, but I knew someone who did, and I was here once before. I like this place." He motioned toward the broad field, the forested hills descending to the Hudson River, the mountains. "I'm stopping by on my way to Alaska." "Alaska? Huh. Why Alaska? Aurora Borealis? Mosquitoes?" "Ah, yes, you're very astute. The mosquitoes, that's exactly why I'm going. I love mosquitoes. Actually, I've always wanted to go to Alaska, and I'm going there, I'm sorry to say this so bluntly, to die." "Oh, I know. What do you say when someone says that? But I've more or less come to terms with it. I've got inoperable cancer. Without going into details, I was told that even with chemo, the progress is not good. I've opted not to spend the rest of whatever time I have feeling nauseous, so I'm visiting the places I want to go, alone." "Alone?" "Yes. I had a girlfriend, but that ended before my diagnosis. My parents are long gone, and I have no siblings. I threw a big party and said goodbye to my friends." "You're brave." "No, I'm not. I'm just doing what I need to do in any given moment and trying to live my remaining days fully." "Well, that's a good thing, but wow, what a hard piece of reality." He said, "But we all will one day. My day appears to be coming a bit sooner than I would have preferred." He pressed his lips together, and in the dimming light I saw tears forming in his eyes. I placed my hand on his shoulder. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "I believe, and I certainly hope I'm right, that there's more than just this." He swung his arm wide. "I choose to believe I'll be moving on to a different form, maybe one that's a pure, bodiless consciousness, maybe another life form, and maybe nothingness. The one good thing that has come from this is that my awareness and learning have accelerated." "What have you learned?" that very few of the things we think desperately matter actually do, that what matters is kindness and love. The rest is pretty much fluff. We talked until nightfall, and then I said I was heading to my boyfriend's for the night. I offered him my room to stay in, which he did. When I came back to my room the next morning, there was a note on my bed. It said simply, "Have a good life, Tucker." I kept that note for several years, and then as is the way with things, it got lost as I moved from place to place. I could still picture his signature, a slight slant to the right, an elongated top to the T, a determined pressure of pen on the paper. I looked at him now in the Welsh pub, studying the fullness of his face, the brightness of his eyes. "Tucker, what happened? I recall exactly why you went to Alaska." He sat back, took a sip of ale, and squinted into the fire. "I made my way to Alaska over land, then by ship, and finally by plane. I paid a bush pilot to drop me off at a remote camp. I was, for the first time in my life, completely alone. It was a beautiful place, endless evergreen forest and cold blue water, bear and elk, fish and wildflowers. Being alone, there were few distractions from my mind. The bravado I had when I met you at the college all but disappeared, and I experienced the terror of my impending death. I obsessed. I watched my body for signs of worsening. Okay, well, I'll just stop there, and I'll do the rest next time.
Thank you, Carolyn. All right, up next we have Christine Emmert. She is an actress, writer, director, and educator. Her plays have been performed throughout the United States and Canada and the UK. As outreach director for the Hopewell Furnace National Park, she's also written and toured in From Out of the Fiery Furnace for 8 years. She's also appeared in that same play in Williamsburg, Virginia, as part of Historical Writers of America. In addition, she's performed at the Eisenberg camps and works about Jewish life and culture. Christine has 3 books out on Amazon, and she lives in Valley Forge with her husband Richard and their inspirational dog and cat.
Yes.
Christine?
Okay. I'm doing 2 pieces if I have time. The first one is called Old Hippie, and it was performed, it's a monologue, at the Brick Playhouse in Philadelphia. If any of you remember the Brick, it was a writer's playhouse, so it was a great place. But like all bricks, it fell down. Okay, Old Hippie. The flowers died. That's winter for you. The death of my flowers. Not where they have gone, they're here. They're dead, they're not even preserved, not even under glass. And ginger root too, gone, all of it. Oh yes, I grew more responsible into a job, into a marriage, into babies. That's how I grew. Tired of going to funerals for other people. Dead, like the flowers. Flower power lasts an hour. Then they found my real name, the name I took before hiding in the underground, and they locked me up for crimes against society. Well, I waved my arms at a cop during a demonstration years ago, and they said I shot him. I had no gun, just the power of the flower. Well, my husband was shocked. He fought in Vietnam and never suspected. Well, my children thought all I ever did was sew quilts and bake brownies. Perfectly harmless, I know. The cop knew it wasn't me, but he blamed me anyway. And briefly, the newspapers wrote me up as some Joan of Arc turned evil. And there was a bid for film rights. There was the death of my father. He had a heart attack during the trial. And now, well, I'm really making love, not war, not protests. My life has been spent inside a prison with so many other ladies. We make paper flowers for senior centers. I just can't escape those blossoms. Okay. My second piece is called David's Harp, and it was based on David, the shepherd boy in the Bible, and his relationship with Jonathan, the son of King Saul. He would always hang his harp on the same tree for Jonathan to spy. When they would meet each day, kissing, running along the borders of the kingdom. When they were children, it seemed sweet. But later they knew there would be frowns if any saw them. The sheep scattered when they moved among the flock. He professed he loved the Lord, but he loved Jonathan more, and Jonathan professed the same. It would have been their eternity of secret sweetness had not a crafty servant followed them and pulled them apart at the moment of culmination, and there was no joy after that. Whippings and separation and tree branches bare of the harp. Although he did not play his harp afterwards, the harp sang within him in a clear, thin voice of love and of those who would kill its song in the name of their own unforgiving love. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Christine. Up next we have Lena Fay. She was born in St. Petersburg, formerly Leningrad, Russia. She started reading very early, and by the age of 8, she had read all of Sherlock Holmes' stories and many others. She became interested in literature and writing by middle school. Lena graduated from the Academy of Pharmaceutical Sciences in St. Petersburg, Russia, with a master's degree in chemical engineering, accomplished writing in biotechnology. She left the former USSR in 1989 as a 23-year-old refugee, part of a Russian Jewish wave of emigration, finally arriving in Philadelphia. She has been writing life stories in a traditional Jewish storytelling style with a humor through tears approach. Her stories are a reflection of her crazy life as a professional scientist, a genetic engineer, and a single parent of 2 teens. Her stories are also a reflection of her upbringing as a child of parents who lived through the 900 days of blockade and starvation in Leningrad during World War II, evacuation, and the following horrible years of Stalin's repressions. 75% of her family passed away in Leningrad during the winter of 1941-42 from starvation or while defending Leningrad in the civilian brigades. Besides writing, Lena also enjoys tennis, ping pong, hiking, camping, and Russian and French cinema. Lena.
I actually didn't know which story to read to you tonight, because I kind of used to read to my friends, and they've been for years my sort of listeners, so I decided to do something more neutral. And I would like to know your opinion about it. So, and that's been like, how did I come in America? I have been asked many times the same question, how did I come to America? And I have been answering, describing with details many times over and over again. It happened 28 years ago. However, that day is still clear and memorable today, as it's only happened last week. I first arrived at JFK in New York airport from Rome, Italy on May 11, 1990. I was 24 years old and alone. I had 2 suitcases with me and a few $100s, a piece of paper that stated in English, French, and Russian that I was, in fact, a stateless person from USSR. I had a birth certificate and all my college and high school diplomas with me. I spoke 1,000 words in English. I was fluent in French, Italian, and Russian. I finally decided to write it down and live through it once and forever. To start, I should go back 6 months to my departure from my ex-motherland, Russia, a former Soviet Union, on 17 December of 1989. For you, my dear friends, to relate to the situation, I should say that back in 1989, one could not easily travel outside of the USSR. To be precise, the government did not allow Soviet citizens to travel abroad, period. And unless you were a special case of a Communist Party member or a famous sportsman or a ballerina, you were to stay behind this iron curtain forever. I was a member of I was a Russian Jew, the third-class citizen, that declared the desire for political and religious freedom to return to my religious land of Israel. It was the only way to immigrate. Well, I guess I have to maybe say a little bit about it. So Russia was closed for any foreign travelers, for normal citizens. So in order to get out of that country, you have to say that you wanted to go to Israel because Israel had no relationship with the Soviet Union. You didn't have to be Jew. You could be Baptist, and a lot of Baptists were escaping the same way. You could be a religious person of any kind, however, the Israel accept everyone. So that was the only way out. USSR had no diplomatic relationship with Israel, so all paperwork was going through Dutch consulate in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. We stayed for hours in queues to get to the consulate to obtain the visas. Then we waited for months and months in queue daily to get tickets for the plane from Leningrad to Vienna, Austria. That was the only way, actually. You go to Europe, to Vienna, and then with the wave of Jewish immigration, you stay in Vienna until you get visa, then you transfer to Italy, and then there you're waiting for a visa to get to the United States, if you get it. In fact, nobody knew if you get to the United States, but at that time, in 1989, 1990, the other countries were open too for Jews. So it was Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, so you could have get there too. If you matched the quota, you had to be educated, you had to be certain age, you had to have certain degree, you had to speak language. In order to be accepted to Canada, you had to pay money. In order to be accepted to Australia, you had to pay some money too. Well, we were allowed to take only $100 with us. That's how generous was the Soviet Union. 2 suitcases, 1 golden ring, $100, and go home, and you out, and you're stateless. So, meanwhile, we have to collect all paperwork from the place of employment, university, and vacate the apartment, which in most cases did not belong to us, but was rented from the government. We needed to sell all our life possessions. We were only allowed to bring 2 suitcases per person and $100 with us. To take a hike to another world, it literally meant that we were living forever, no return. And possibly we will never see our families again. Back in 1999, the mail was not a reliable way of communication in Russia. The letters were opened and stolen in the post office. The phones were snooped by KGB. To make an international call to a foreign country, one had to go to the main city post office. It was expensive and was closely monitored by police. Oh, I guess I'm done, right? I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Lena. Up next is Greg Fox. When he began teaching, he had to quit his night job as a ninja in order to be seen by his students. Rather than assassination, Greg specialized in the art of sarcasm, which he found to be a more lethal as well as more legal method of thwarting his opponents. Now, for the sake of posterity, he's crafting a selection of short stories and vignettes about growing up Catholic in post-World War II Philadelphia titled Fathers, Sons, and Ghosts. Greg.
Okay. Now, this is a love story. Stay, Jordan pointed down at his dog without even looking at him. Buster sat back on his haunches and let out a sigh. A split second later, he would have been sprinting across the open field toward a hole in the fence that led to the DMZ, as Jordan called it, a lush valley of oak trees and thick brush where no one lived and children never played. This was Buster's private kingdom, where he scavenged and fought and mated with the collarless dogs that crossed the narrow creek from West Philadelphia. Jordan worshipped his dog more than every living creature that walked, crawled, swam, flew, or galloped across the face of the earth. Buster was the only brown puppy among 5 black ones born in his parents' garage when Jordan was just a teenager, and Jordan was smitten at first sight. He just knew there was something divine about the pup. perhaps a reward for all those Sundays spent in church, kneeling beside his war hero father, who prayed for the end of the latest war so that his only son would not get drafted. Since it worked so well for his dad, Jordan decided to give the prayer thing a try and asked for a dog of his very own. Buster had to be more than a coincidence. Any doubts Jordan might have harbored about Buster's divine conception were settled once and for all one mid-April evening just after Jordan completed his first year of college. The air was still cool enough for a light sweater, and leftover withered leaves swirled in the breeze along with blades of newly cut grass and white dandelion wishing spores. Jordan and Buster had recently resumed their after-dinner ritual of racing each other from the backyard to the high school athletic field, where Buster would slide under the fence and Jordan would vault the section where the barbed wire had been cut away. Then each would take off in separate directions. Sometimes Jordan would jog the perimeter of the field or toss his frisbee into the wind and try to catch it while waiting for Buster to finish his business. When it grew dark, the sky above the field was always full of stars, and Jordan would climb on top of the batting cage and count the 727s and DC-9s banking for a landing at Philly International. Jordan always waited for Buster, and he never worried. But on that mid-April evening, Jordan noticed a lone, shadowy figure moving across the field, at first too far away for him to see clearly without his glasses. It was unusual finding anyone still there long after the field hockey girls and softball players had packed up their gear and headed home for dinner. "Female," Jordan whispered. "I can tell by the way she's walking, and she seems to be coming toward us." Buster saw her too and stopped his panning in an attempt to catch a telltale sniff. As she came closer, Jordan noticed two long legs connecting a pair of daisy-duked cutoffs to a pair of high-top Chuck Taylor All-Stars. Her long brown hair was tied back in a ponytail beneath a baseball cap that had been turned backwards, and she carried a first baseman's mitt under the arm of her gray sweatshirt. Jordan gasped. It was none other than Marcia Cunningham, the Marcia Cunningham. Since the day she transferred in from the Catholic girls' school in 9th grade, Marcia Cunningham was the most coveted yet most unattainable female student ever to saunter the halls of William P. Nolan High School. During her senior year, she was voted homecoming queen, prom queen, most attractive, and most likely to marry an ex-Beatle. Jordan could think of no one in any of his classes who owned bragging rights to her, not even the square-jawed quarterback, Tony Ransom. Rumor was that Marcia only dated guys who were in college, or guys with tattoos, or guys with motorcycles. To call her beautiful was an understatement. Marcia Cunningham was an anomaly of genetic collaboration. If the ever-meddling Greek god Zeus looked down from Mount Olympus in search of a mortal bride, his choice would have been a no-brainer. Jordan never even talked to her, didn't know the sound of her voice or if she could speak at all. None of the teachers ever called on her in class. Jordan figured that Marcia Cunningham would never acknowledge a friendly hi there or hello from someone as insignificant to her game plan as he was. She would have swatted away any attempt at communication as if it were an annoying fly or mosquito. But there she was, closer to him than home plate was to first base and approaching quickly. It was already too late to turn away or pretend not to notice her. He thought about throwing a stick to Buster to retrieve, then running beside him in that direction, but that would have been too obvious. He considered pretending not to recognize her, except that she might actually recognize him. Then he would seem like a real jerk. His only option was to look directly into her eyes and greet her. He wondered what he should say or could say without stuttering or gagging on his own words. "Hi there, Marcia." "Hello there, Marcia." "Hey, what's up, Marcia?" Jordan silently rehearsed, and his breaths came faster and faster until Marcia Cunningham stopped directly in front of them. Jordan thought he was going to faint. My, she said in a breathy voice belonging to some 1930s film noir femme fatale. "Aren't you a handsome doggy?" Marcia Cunningham then kneeled in front of Buster on both knees and began rubbing her palms against the insides of his long furry ears. I gotta finish this. I got to. Good. That's good. All right. And telling and retelling of what happened next has since become the heroic fable among Jordan's family and close friends. It was then that Marcia Cunningham, the Marcia Cunningham, placed her perfectly delicate nose against Buster's black tip snout and rubbed. Buster, in his desire to reciprocate such an affectionate overture from a strange human being, proceeded to lick every square centimeter of Marcia Cunningham's face, beginning with her chin, working his way up to her delicate nose, then to her eyes, and finally each of her high-boned cheeks, taking every opportunity to achieve maximum tongue-on-face contact. Marcia just giggled. Jordan had to watch, I'm almost done. Jordan had to watch passively as his very own dog, do to Marcia Cunningham what any guy on the varsity football team would give up his college scholarship to do to Marcia Cunningham. Then she just stood up, gave Buster a final pat on the top of his big furry head, and walked away without so much as a glance at Jordan, not even a nod. Jordan thought for a moment. Fair enough, he said, hopefully loud enough for Marcia to hear, but as she did, she offered no receipt of purchase. As the breeze carried away the last of winter's withered leaves and the new grass clippings and the white dandelion spores that will grant your wish if you catch one and set it free again, Jordan knelt down and threw his arm around his dog Buster. Together they watched as Marcia Cunningham floated away over the pitcher's mound, across the cinder running track, through the goalpost, and out of their lives forever. Buster was still licking his lips. I just have to say one thing, Jordan began. I hope you realize you are a god.
All right, thank you, Greg. Up next, we have C.J. Hendrick. He's a member of the Phoenix Writers Group, 29, with an associate's degree from Montgomery County Community College, and he processes invoices for a company in Prussia. C.J.
Okay, so here's a slightly abridged version of the first chapter of my young adult fiction book, The Marauder Legacy. In the ink-black darkness, all was quiet. The only hint of life was the figure that leapt from rooftop to rooftop. Due to the speed with which the figure ran, one might have mistaken it for a cougar, but none would have realized it was actually a ninja. After a short run, he finally reached the roof of the building beside a luxury apartment complex. With a grin, he leapt towards the building and flipped around, landing on the side, feet first. Rather than falling, the ninja manifested its ki to cling to the building, and ran at an angle up the side until it reached an apartment with an open window. It was a routine exercise for the young warrior. But this time, something different happened. No sooner did he reach the window, did a snowball hit him in the face. The boy in the sharp suit and glasses turned on a light and chuckled softly, wiping the remnants of frost on his arm. Pretty clumsy, Makoto. You're mean, said Makoto as he removed his goggles and hopped inside. You knew when I'd be back, but the average bystander would have been bewildered. Actually, I sensed your arrival. If even I can sense you, that's a good sign you can't control your power as well as you used to. He tossed Makoto a towel. You've been going out more often. Am I really that obvious? Makoto dapped himself with the towel. I heard rumors of a new ninja migrating to town. I heard the same. The difference is that I stay home like I'm told and don't go on a ninja hunt. Maybe it's because you're not as adventurous as you should be, pouted Makoto as he tossed the towel back. If you can't keep up, I'll leave you in my dust. Don't change the subject. Besides, one of us has to follow the rules and not risk exposing ourselves to the normal humans. Of course, it should be a keeper of the charade, if anyone. Fine. Please don't tell Oba-chan on me. If I could sense you, what makes you think Eiko couldn't? Yeah, that's true, said Makoto as he removed his boots and gloves. Can I get you anything before I turn in? No, thanks. Good night, Christian. Night. He stepped out of Makoto's room and walked down the hall before the lady of the apartment appeared before him. Mistress, I take it my boy's back from his romp around the city. That's right. Did he find his ninja? Nope. That's no surprise. She doesn't actually move in until Wednesday, she said with a smile. Nothing escapes your notice, does it? So it's a girl, too. That ought to make him happy. I imagine so. Her name is Jasmine Clemens. You even know her name? Even if it's you, she's not a very good ninja if you know who she is. Well, she isn't actually trying to hide herself. She was homeschooled all her life, and she decided to discover what the public school environment is like. Incidentally, calling her a ninja is actually misleading. It's merely that her agility and precision can pass for ninja. A fake, is she? And here I thought things were going to liven up. I've been relaxed too much. Christian raised his eyebrow with intrigue. What do you know now? I know a lot. Christian rolled his eyes. Oh, don't be mad. You know if I hide things from you boys, it's either for your own good or because I think it's funny. I never hide anything that might hurt you for not knowing. And yet, when you hide things for our own good, it tends to end in a painful lesson. Only because pain is an excellent teacher, she teased as she walked away. I'll tuck in early. That'll be all, Christian. Night-night. Echo, surprised the spice of life marauder, everyone. Christian crumbled under his breath. There we go. That's
Jay. Up next we have Judah Kosterman. Judah was born into a family of characters and incongruent Midwestern intersection of liberal socialism, conservative Calvinism, and Danish American culture. She loves telling stories no matter what genre she's working in. Past member of the Penn Laurel Poet Society, she can be seen and heard these days as part of the Mad Poet Society, the Philly Writers Meetup, and our very own Phoenix Fiction Writers. You can also catch her blog posts on www.justbeparenting.com and her book reviews on Goodreads. She's deeply satisfied to have finished writing her first novel. Judah.
I'm here. So the book that I just finished writing deals with a licensed clinical social worker who is having something resembling a mid-career and midlife crisis. He works with children at a hospital, and towards the end of the book he has gone out on bereavement leave and come back only to find that his favorite little patient has just gotten a terminal diagnosis, and the scene takes place right after that. So the chapel, not a place he normally spent time. Time doesn't really exist in here. No clocks, no audible passersby, no intercom. A fire alarm was discreetly mounted above each exit door so chapel visitors wouldn't be left out of any emergency. Short of that, though, feel free to stay all day. Ben breathed in the dim. The white walls and ceiling might have had a fair fight against the maroon carpet and dark wood if it wasn't for the stained glass windows. Vertical strips of geometric shapes set in cobalt, non-denominational and what passed for modern once. The pew he was sprawled on creaked like the timbers of an old ship. Light blew off the water. On either side of the raised platform at the front were racks of flickering LED tea lights to make the fire marshal happy. As always, there were fresh-cut flowers in the niche at the back of the platform. Presumably, the flowers gave those in the pews something alive and beautiful to contemplate, which ignored the fact that as soon as you cut them, they were dead. Cut off and rootless, just sipping your water and pretending for a while, with you on that one, and projected towards the base. One of the doors opened, near silent on its hinges. A cone of light from the hallway widened, then narrowed. Gentle yellow lights had been placed in the hallway outside the chapel, rather than the blue-white fluorescence found everywhere else. Door opens and closes, sunrise, sunset, then even the usual clang of the panic bar was muted in the chapel as the cone of light disappeared. The pewback flexed behind him, someone moving one row back and using his pew for a railing. Ben heard the squeak thump of the kneeler being lowered, the balloon squeeze of knees on the overstuffed padded beam. Someone humble before their God, maybe begging, maybe just thinking, believing at least. Ben sighed. Can't hurt, might help. He hadn't looked to see who it was. The flash of movement in his peripheral vision told him his companion was Catholic, busy tracing a death onto their living frame to open a channel to the beyond. Heard you had a rough morning. Want to share? Hattie Sullivan, come to shrink his head. What the hell, as the Catholics would say. The hell of resignation, not the hell where you were surprised or saw the damned. I lied to a kid today. Ben's gaze shifted to the Crayola smear from the windows angling up the wall. Not just one of those half lies we all tell, like saying, I'll check into that, when you already know the answer's no. Or how we say, things will work out, when what we really mean is, you're screwed, I'm just here to help you deal with it. Nope. He paused. I flat out lied. I told the kid I believe in an afterlife when I'm not sure there's anything beyond just this. Patty had crossed her arms on the pew back. Why do you think you did that? Because she needed it to be true. She needed some good to look forward to after all that's happened to her. Ben's voice hitched. Sometimes I wish it was true too. He thought all his tears were shed, but a pair of them slipped from under his lids, ran down to his jaw, and hung there, cooling. How do you feel about it, what you did today? There was a small sticky spot on the wooden pew back in front of him, a drop of something overlooked which had dried there. It was just the right size to worry like a bead. I screwed up and let the roles get reversed and became the client. I didn't dissuade the client from making physical contact, and then I made physical contact myself for my own purposes. He thought I am so not mentioning the morphine, something even Mother Confessor doesn't need to know. You'll be within your rights to bring me up on an ethics violation. You heard her draw a long breath. The nurses tell me Emma laughed today. First time in a week. Patty's timbers creaked as she shifted. We cast these children into roles we ought not to. We pity them, call them martyrs and heroes. I'm as guilty of it as anyone when the list of symptoms gets long enough. And our little Emma, Exhibit A, isn't she? We'll have her turned into a plaster saint any day now. But you, how many supposedly smart people have been on her care teams, and yet you're the only one who's ever thought to treat her differently? I don't know how you do it or where it comes from. No, but you gave Emma back her humanity today, and there's nothing untrue or unethical about that.
Thank you, Judah. Very well timed.
Up next, we have Steve Kupferschmidt. He's been writing poetry for many years. His work has been published in several magazines, most recently in the Aurorian of Farmington, Maine. He retired 1 year ago after a long career as a music editor and composer, arranger of choral music for young singers. He worked for Shawnee Press and J.W. Pepper & Son. Steve.
I had submitted some poetry to a magazine in Pittsburgh, which subsequently was not published, but this poem I'm going to read is about that experience from the poem's point of view. It's called Windfall. This poem is departing Philadelphia, bound for Pittsburgh. The sky is clear above the early morning fog with only a light headwind. Thanks to a succinct opening line, we're already aloft and climbing to a comfortable altitude. The shadow of the text looks like black lace rising and falling over the rolling hills as though published by the sun. Reading it makes my eyelids heavy with sleep. I awaken just in time to see the sibilance of the Susquehanna River shimmering, slithering snake-like into the distance. We're over western Pennsylvania now, and the airspace approaching Pittsburgh is congested. There are so many poems waiting to land, we are in a holding pattern. Sadly, the poet who wrote this suffers from metaphor abuse. Our imagination is exhausted. We're going to have to land in the cornfield up ahead. There are plenty of soft vowel sounds to cushion the impact, but the voices of displaced crows drown out the music. An old farmer hears the commotion and comes to investigate. He puts his glasses on and reads the poem. Then he says to himself, "Why, this is just what Martha needs to fertilize her tomatoes." This is called Deceased Tree. A summer afternoon, a young boy is playing doctor, examining the dead tree in my yard. He listens with his stethoscope. He takes a plastic syringe out of his kit and gives the tree a shot, then listens again. He kneels and hits one of the large protruding roots with a small rubber hammer, checking its reflexes. Again he listens at different places on the trunk. Then he puts his medical instruments away, picks up his kit, faces the tree, bows his head and makes a sign of the cross, as a priest would do giving the last rites. He turns around and sees me watching. I gesture for him to approach. I ask him, "How did the tree sound through your stethoscope?" He thinks for a few seconds and says, "Like the winter wind." In my days as a commuter, this is called approaching Audubon. There is an intersection with a traffic light that's always red when I get to it. I always have to stop and wait. It's about halfway on my hour-and-a-half commute. On the southeast corner, there's a big yard with an old farmhouse, a small spring house, a large beech tree, some fruit trees, and a vegetable garden. Sometimes I see an old man working in the garden, and they wave to him. I've spent a lot of time here, a couple minutes each way every day, 20 minutes a week for 9 years, almost 7 days altogether. You might say I've been visiting the folks who live here for a week, being an impolite guest by sitting in my car the whole time. If I pulled into the driveway, I bet they'd welcome me. The old man would recognize me and come over to greet me, asking if I didn't get awfully tired of waiting at that red light. He'd introduce me to his wife, who would probably invite me to stay for dinner. If the weather was turning bad, they'd probably insist I spend the night. My boss would wonder what happened to me. He would call my wife, who would probably call the police. They'd be issuing an all-points bulletin as I was enjoying a delicious breakfast with my new friends, who are really old friends. Fresh brewed coffee, crisp bacon and scrambled eggs, and a big slice of homemade blueberry pie.
Great, thank you, Steve. Just want to point out for the latecomers, once again, we have flyers in the back for our writers group. Gives the dates and times of when we meet. There's also a flyer there for the Mainline Writers Group Noir at the bar. They've asked us to hand those out to them. That's happening tomorrow. I'm not sure where. I have to put the flyer that carefully, sorry. Wednesday. I'm a terrible liar as well. Alright, up next we have Carolyn Morris. She is a member of our Phoenix Writers. She writes literary surrealism, and her work has been published in Body Parts, The Flexible Persona, and Shimmer. She was a nominee for the 2016 Pushcart Prize. Carolyn.
Hi, this is a new short. My dad's like on the back going, hey. Okay. This is a new short story that I am working on, and hopefully we'll be able to get through the entire thing. Okay. The wishing night. They slept together on a wishing night. If they'd realized what day it was, they never would have done it. But they were in love, and it made them forgetful. She was underneath him, her hands curled around his shoulders. His face was buried in her neck, and she could feel his breath as it tickled her skin. She thought, I wish we could melt into each other, just like this. And then they did. They didn't realize it until morning. They thought it had been their choice to stay twined as lovers all night, but when they tried to separate, they couldn't. Their bodies ached from lying tangled together. Their muscles were stiff and cold, but no amount of tugging moved them from each other. It was like someone had come in the middle of the night and painted the spaces between them with super glue. Their chests pressed together, her hands stuck to his shoulders, her right leg crooked, her thigh glued to his groin. It was luck alone that his hands had fallen to either side of her before she made her wish. Her stupid, ridiculous wish. It meant that at least they had one pair of hands between them. Below their knee, her feet swung freely so that she could wrap them around his waist. This meant they'd be able to sit, too. His feet and legs were free to walk, but his movement was shambling. When he got out of bed, holding her weight in his crossed arms, she could feel his shortened gait. She hung off him, and the parts where they joined hurt. They'd need to have a sling made to keep her secure and to protect his back. His eyes were free so he could see, which was lucky because he was the walker, but he couldn't speak, and the only breaths he got came from one nostril. His mouth pressed against her shoulder in a permanent kiss, or maybe he didn't have lips anymore. There was no way to know. She lifted her shoulders and she was tense, and if she did it for too long, he heaved against her because he couldn't breathe, and she had to force herself to relax. She spent long nights terrified that she might smother him in her sleep. If he died, would she die too? She was the only one of them who could talk. When it first happened, they had no food in the house, so they wrapped a sheet around themselves and shambled outside. Clothes didn't fit, not anymore. There's all kinds of strange things in the street in the morning after a wishing night, but surely they were the strangest. The stares of the people were heavy on their backs. Everyone knew what had happened, and everyone else knew better. They knew not to make wishes on wishing nights. They wanted to go home and hide, but they needed provisions. He dragged her to stores and got what she told him to get. He loaded things onto cash register belts and turned around so she could chat with the cashiers. And then cashiers turned away from her with their eyes down. They got cartons of milk and frozen dinners, extra large bathrobes to wear, and movies to watch. At home, she told him what to cook and how to do it, and when it was done, she pretended it tasted all right. Jeez, guys. After a while, he got better, and she stopped pretending. With his mouth glued to her neck and shoulder, he couldn't eat, so she ate for both of them. She felt like she was always eating. After their first trip, they learned to have food delivered from the grocery store. Good times. Soon after that, they stopped going out altogether. It was too hard, and they were sure that they wouldn't be trapped like this forever. Wishing nights were rare, but they were predictable. They would have time enough for going out later. They needed to work. Since his hands were free to type, his company let him work remotely. Since she was bilingual, she took a translating job. She wore a headset at all times, and when the phone rang, she never knew who would be on the other end. Someone calling to renew their passport, or someone trying desperately to reach 911. They couldn't see each other even though they were always together. So they set up 2 mirrors at the desk and across the room. At first, they stared fixedly because it had been days since they'd seen one another. But then they got nervous and they stole glances like new lovers needed, brief and quick as kisses. But finally, the mirrors became another part of their lives, firm and comfortable as a well-worn couch. They didn't know how they knew, but if one looked up, the other one was always looking back. And they would smile as best they could, reassured, and go back to work. They noticed the change in the cooking. She used to have to explain things to him, long, detailed litanies about chopping, sautéing, and broiling. Then one day she realized that if she closed her eyes, she could see the onion he was chopping. She thought at first she was just really good at visualizing, but then another day she felt the knife as if it was in her hands, and it felt so good to hold something. Okay. And it felt so good to hold something and to move her fingers after keeping them still for so long that she didn't question it. And finally, it was the 2 of them cooking, neither entirely sure which one of them was doing what. It was like waking up on a lazy morning, a process so slow and smooth they didn't know was happening until it was over. It's like 2 paragraphs. You guys want to do the end of this? Right. Eventually, signs for the next wishing night began to crop up. There was a solar eclipse, and all the sheep in a field disappeared overnight. People began practicing rusty meditation skills and stocking up on sleep aids, guaranteed to stop dreaming. She stayed quiet about the upcoming wishing night, and he didn't type her a message. Finally, it was there, and they lay in bed together, feeling the blood pass back and forth between them. Maybe they fell asleep by accident, both waiting for the other one to wish. Maybe they were too scared. The warnings they should have heeded from childhood finally catching up to them too late. Or maybe it was because there was something to being one half of a 2-hearted beast that made the darkness at night bearable. It doesn't matter. It amounts to the same thing. In the morning, they were still together.
Thank you, Carolyn. Up next, we have Shannon OShea. She's a member of the Phoenix Fiction Writers Workshop at the Phoenix Hill Library. She writes literary fantasy with an emphasis on fairy tale and folklore. And she just, in the past week, had her first publication in the Flexible Persona. We'll give Shannon a big hand.
Some of you might recognize this because I've read from it before, but I published it so you could It's a story about a girl whose mother jumps off a pier and either becomes a selfie or doesn't. Mama wasn't back by morning. Daddy called out of work. The sheriff called us that afternoon, and we rode to the station in the big truck, which still had Dad's fishing net in the back, with snow chains on. The radio stayed off. Nobody said anything the whole way. When we got there, they put me in a room by myself while Daddy went somewhere else. It was a kid's room, with tiny furniture, a bin of stuffed animals, and letters on the wall above big shiny mirrors. I sat carefully on a little blue chair, even though it was too small, with my hands in my lap, just like Mama, watching the door my father had gone through. It was polished brown wood, heavy looking, with a window in the middle, latticed with wire. After 10 minutes, the door swung open again. Daddy's coat was off, slung over one arm. He had unbuttoned his collar and rolled his sleeves up, revealing his anchor tattoo and my mother's name. Slippery little fish started swimming around in my stomach. I stayed where I was, suddenly acutely aware of the way the bones in my knees touched in front of me. Daddy walked across the playroom and stopped in the middle, leaving a whole ocean of space between us. He didn't say anything, just scratched at his scalp and let the silence linger. Kiddo. His hand twitched like he wanted to reach out to me, but stayed plastered to his side. Then his expression changed, steeled, and he said all at once, "It's done, they're calling off the search." So they found her. He frowned and looked past me over my shoulder at the wall. No, we probably never will. Something dropped inside me. You're giving up already. My voice was light, airier than usual to my ears. Daddy shook his head. He crossed his arms under his coat, hugging it closer to his chest, withdrawing from me. I'm sorry, kid. He sounded as desperate as I'd ever heard him. But how do you know? She could be waiting. There was a pause before he answered, like he had to rev himself up. His eyes moved past me, down to the ground between us. He licked his lips, took a big breath. She ain't waiting, he said at last. She's gone. I couldn't respond. I stared down at my hands instead, twisting in my lap. My cuticles were dry. My nails were bitten down. I had been growing them, like Mama's, but at some point I must have started chewing them again. Finally, I took a deep breath and looked up. How do you know? I said again. I waited for him to answer, but the silence drew out between us. Daddy. Daddy wouldn't look at me. When I said his name, he closed his eyes and swallowed hard enough that his Adam's apple bobbed like a buoy. Because they found a video of that night, his voice was strange. She, in that old coat, jumped off the wooden pier, and she still ain't washed up. Maybe won't. Oh. If it were somebody else instead of me, they would have cried. Maybe I should have. But me and Daddy were cut from the same cloth. That's what Mama always said. It sounded like a bad thing. I think it made her lonely. Mama would have cried. Daddy wouldn't look at me. I thought about what Daddy had said, about that coat, about what Mama had said at the thrift shop, and all the old sailor stories, about Mama being dead, never being able to change her mind and come back, and I was sure. You're wrong. Daddy's eyes flicked toward me. He made to argue, but I steamrolled over him. You're wrong. Just because she swam away, don't mean she's gone forever. Daddy's hand went to his face. Sweetie, you gotta... No, I insisted. She had her coat with her. She's fine. That's how it works. She swam away. You just gotta find her and tell her to come back. Girlie, I'm sorry, Daddy said. But she would have said goodbye. We gotta talk about this. I'm going to the bathroom. I jumped to my feet and left the room before he could say anything else. I could feel him staring at my back as I went. They hadn't found her. Daddy and the stupid cops were just giving up. Stop there.
Thank you, Shannon. Up next, we have Mrs. Elsie Ryman-Schneider. She's been involved in literacy, education, and special holiday, seasonally, and theme-based writings for 60 years or so. Even as a child, she worked on local newsletters and even won a prestigious award for a Jack and Jill type Mike versus Right feature she herself prepared. Mrs. R has directed and been involved in as a literacy trainer for nearly 50 years. She's served as project director for many nonprofit books, newsletters, and literacy publications. This foreign writer has often been referred to by many as a royal literacy queen.
This is from the heart of a grouch. In my defense. Happy, happy, happy? Come on, in this world, get real. Years ago, I learned that people who almost never complain make a lot of us feel miserable. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you should never stop grumbling, nor am I saying there aren't some beautiful moments you'll spend here on earth and some spiritually beautiful people you'll meet. However, and I'll try to keep the exceptions to less than 10 million words. However, there are also times when life on earth, for anyone, is so annoying, so disappointing, so scary, and horrible. You name it, that not to voice discontent then would be an injustice to anyone suffering. I know some people think at miserable times, like I've mentioned, you should just grin and bear it. Sorry, I have to read it. Sure, now and then, here and there, and to a degree. But actually, that suggestion is often confusing advice. They, I have in parentheses the mysterious they, who pretend to have the wisdom of the ages, but often offer ideas that only work in once in a blue moon. They also tell us to assert ourselves sometimes. They even say there are lessons in that area which instruct us not to be afraid to speak out at times. But when you should speak out, when you should grin and bear it, that's very unclear. So should you believe them when they say you won't have any friends if you're like me? Are they sure people wouldn't be just as annoyed at someone who was, as I said before, ridiculously happy all the time? Happy, happy, happy. And who couldn't understand why anyone would complain at all? That they say that no one wants to be around a grouch. Did they, that same they, ever hear of degrees? Don't they see they themselves make the world harder by being so darn ridiculously illogical? Well, I would be shocked if no one but me felt like joking someone. It's a nice little part of it. Felt like joking someone who fully understood what life's all about. Come on. There's even a song that supports my view that there are many confusing messages, although it tells you to just take it as it comes and really doesn't help those of us who know that that won't help us change some horrific situations, not only in our own life, but in that of many others. The song Learn to Be Still, sung by a group called the Eagles, who just agrees with me about how hard life is and how ungodly baffling it is. But I feel even though the music is wonderful, the ideas don't deal with the fact that just being still is only appropriate in some limited situations of life. It mentions the awful bewilderment we face, such as being upset. Turn the page on, I should get to it. Just being in some places where you're pulled in different directions. And it says, how do I get out of here? Where do I fit in? It admits that you and others may often feel torn and shaken, but only has one idea that they think will help. You guessed it, it's just learning to be still. Does anyone but me wonder if there might be many times when you should make a noise instead, yes, even be grouchy, so others, see someone is hurting. And I've got a footnote about information that the song came from, but anyway. Can't you see my point? Don't you wish more people would admit that ideas like the song suggests are just as confusing as the messages they complain about? Does anybody see that no matter what the way they think, life is more complex than a lot of seemingly real cheery little people admit? You see how I got to be Gabriel Grouch? I purposely called him Gabriel because it was the name Charles, I believe. Admit it, there's some sense to what I'm saying and lots of reasons to fuss and listen to others fussing. Again, I don't mean every minute of every day, but enough so you don't have it bottled up and have to live in a fantasy world all the time. Now, I got some other ideas for you to consider, so if you haven't considered these messages and points before, you'll be able to have a little mercy when you deal with anyone like me. You ready? Here we go. What about the boredom of being around someone who is always acting as if everything's fine, or even more unrealistic, always terrific? And do you think the movie they had a long time ago about the Stepford wife who was never discontent was popular because of that quality or because they made it clear she only acted that way because she'd been programmed to always obey and always be pleasant even when she should, rightfully have taken a stand for her rights? I'm a guy, Gabriel Grouch. But I can see that being a Stepford wife was not fair or logical. Besides, since we as a society are making some effort, grumbling, about women's need for more respect, shouldn't there be a male counterpart in the movie, like the Stepford man? I'm not saying, I'm not telling you.
He said you had everything went through it.
Okay, I'm not telling you here and now. We Grouches, no, I am telling you, I'm sorry, here and now, it's we Grouches can make such things happen. So how about admitting that life would be extremely boring if we always were content? And furthermore, would anything ever improve or get invented that way? Don't even think you can be a happy medium all the time. And anyway, should you be? Maybe you should be good and angry at cruelty, injustice, people who can't see reasons to complain about harmful conditions. And true, it does get tiring and annoying being around a group all the time, but tell me the truth. Do you ever feel you could just strangle Mr. and Mrs. Always cheerful? I guess it's wise to pick and choose depending on who you're with and what they're going through themselves. Even a good friend can just bear so much of your pain when he or she is going through a lot of his or her own. But consider, as I said before, in spite of beautiful stars, roses, enchanting music, shouldn't you or someone who has to endure a cheating husband, gossipy friends, any kind of terror, a lost job, complain at least for a little while? What if every time you turn around, you or someone you love has a tragedy? Would it even be reasonable or kind not to be somewhat grouchy? I'm sorry. What if you offered help free of charge and instead of being appreciated, someone tried to shoot you? I'm sorry. or bothering him or her. If you're not grouchy, after that for a while, you must not feel the normal range of emotions that feeling, caring human beings feel on such occasions. It's even biblical to be grouchy at times. The great prophets actually said there's a time to love and a time to hate. I will admit, at least on alternate Wednesdays, that it helps to look constantly for ways to cheer yourself and others up when you're going through or have been through a tough time. But come on, never grouchy? What a drag. Besides, maybe others will feel fear to vent and release their hurt and frustration if you do. And maybe that way you'll help prevent horrible explosions of emotions that cause all kinds of chaos. Okay, I'll give you this gradually and not way too much. I'll give you that. And actually, if you let yourself here and there, now and then, be open and honest about your grouchy moments, instead of bottling them up, you'll find in the long run, you'll move on and have more zest for living and make people more comfortable to be around you because you are willing to look at the great side of life with them. And I'm not the only one that believes all this. There's an actual holiday, it was yesterday, there's an actual holiday set aside each year for girls. It's October 15th, National Grouch Day. While the origins of this holiday are not confirmed, some believe the event was related to, in honor of everyone's favorite Sesame Street grump, Oscar the Grouch. I got this on the internet again. And before you knock it, please consider my points. Also, maybe rather than, I'm sorry.
No, that was mine.
Just trying to wrap up.
Can I finish or not?
Try and wrap up, please.
Also, maybe rather than criticizing grudges who are by definition grouchy enough already, without your heaping more worries on them, maybe it would be a good idea to treat them to something special. And you can look this up because they actually recommend this for Grouch Day. So they'll know they can at least count on you. Treats suggested by J. Shoemaker Galloway, a writer for Examiner.com, include baking your cookies, sending happy Grouch Day cards. And why would they have that? Happy Grouch Day cards, which are free on the internet at bluemountain.com/display. Treating them to a related movie, such as there was actually a movie called Grumpy Old Man, or buying scary ghost stories for them to read and expecting them to enjoy them, since holiday is right before Halloween. And by the way, have you ever noticed that a story that is too full of just the ordinary or ultra pleasant isn't as apt to draw interest as one with some horror or upsetting happenings? Face it, even the fairy tales have some horror to sustain interest and to prove a point. Admit it. Isn't it true that if Red Riding Hood had nothing to worry about, the story would have lost its appeal as well as its moral? So all in all, it's an old TV show called Different Strokes emphasized. There are different strokes for different folks. So maybe even grouchiness has some purpose. Once again, I, Gabriel Grouch, am not saying kindness and cheerfulness can never help the world. I definitely believe it can. But I still think there wouldn't be much to celebrate if we didn't recognize out loud the bitter times too. So here's to both sides of the coin. My wish is that you appreciate me more Admit it helps to vent at times. Admit that without the scratches, there'd be a little less color and a little less joy when the good times finally do come. So here's to me and mine and you and yours forevermore. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But actually,
Up next, we have Ella Remmings. She's a contributing writer for Ariana Huffington's Thrive Global
Thank you.
and a published author. In her former life, she was a healthcare executive, business writer of medical and healthcare policy stories, and an executive speechwriter for CEOs, COOs, and other O's. A native of Poland, Ella especially enjoys writing about people and places, from sleepy Polish villages to executive boardrooms of corporate America, along with characters that inhabit them. She's currently working on a play and a collection of stories. Ella.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. What I brought for you today is a very brief story about longing. It's about innocence, simplicity, and I'd like to paint you a painting, say a prayer, sing a song, all in the story. Brisk wind is her perfume. I would love to have an end in a countryside far, when the rooster announces the start of each day and the cows moo their way into the morning milking. She would greet me at sunrise with a broad smile and open arms, rough hands gently stroking my face, unabashed about the garden soil lodged beneath her nails. These hands would crack fresh eggs for an omelet, take hot bread out of the oven, and place it on the wooden table among mismatched plates, blue, white, green, and a heavy one with a chipped edge. Before eating, she would take off her flowery apron and hang it up on the hook above the stove. I would love this apron with its culinary history imprinted on the fabric, flour dust, raspberry stains. In her kitchen, there would be a radio tuned into the oldies station, a cadence of nostalgia embracing the cooking sounds, wood on metal, metal on wood, boiling, chopping, slicing, kneading. Her dinners would taste like love, flavored with spices and songs. I'm not sure which would nourish me more, the soothing sound of her voice or the hearty taste of her soup. Her God would live in the barn, in the meows of the tabby cat circling the milk pail, in the daffodil meadows, in the raindrops on bib lettuces in her garden. That's the only God she would need, the one present in the crumbs of each day, not the scalding old man. Life unfolds as it does, she would know, and lean gently into each wave as it came. A birth of someone's baby, a neighbor's funeral. After all, aren't they both an excuse for a good meal? Brisk wind would be her perfume, sunshine her only lotion. She would never question her beauty. She would not binge or diet, wear dresses to hide her waist, or necklaces that complement her shirts. The animals would love her. Why shouldn't she love herself, too? At her house, time would stand still. I would not have to be anyone that I'm not, because she would not try to be anyone she's not. We would know each other's stories. We would laugh at our imperfections. We would cry about our losses. We would connect through words, and we would connect through silence. After the day's work was done, we would meander into the fields and down to the river. We would find our way to the secret cove by the ancient oak tree and, carefully stepping among the forget-me-nots, plunge in with girlish giggles. Refreshed and restored, wet strands framing our faces, we would walk back to the house and compose a melodious dinner. A crackling fire, maybe, a few songs before dessert, and we would talk into the night, our faces softened by the wine and the glowing candles. Oh, how I would love to have an end like that. Thank you.
Up next, we have Dr. J.G. Schneider. He has periodically written short stories and articles for local newsletters and area publications. When completing a self-paced PhD project, Dr. Schneider did an extensive project on the interrelationship of sex and mental health. Some of his features and stories show a flair for humor. On occasion, Dr. J.G. has written heart-wrenching fictional pieces involving anguish caused by cases of medical negligence and incompetence embedded with various forms of abuse. In such works, the heroines achieve or regain their strong crime from insightfulness and pleasant psychological sophistication. Ultimately, his characters become living legacies despite the massive hellish abuse and horrendous circumstances they have resiliently endured.
Okay, first I'm going to do a recap. I think I read half of this before and then the other half. And it's called The Incompetence. And for the first 15 minutes, Hilda was in a painful trance as a young relief maternity intern. Cavalieri informed Mrs. Rosenberg they had to remove the part of her eye that gave her sight to allegedly make her more comfortable. In reality, it was a poorly cloaked cavalier euphemism for the neglect and living hell medical staff had involuntarily made Mrs. Rosenberg succumb to. Later it was learned the infection she had would have got better if they had treated it for several more days and applied more effective medicine sooner. As the news tore her gut limb from limb, Mrs. Rosenberg clung to the deaded hospital railing. Then it talks a little bit how she had a fantasy of her mother and husband rooting for her recovery and goes to get help from the hospital and nobody's really there to help. Then I'm going on to she talks about how Clayton and her husband have a relationship similar to the honeymooners, and some of the siblings weren't as supportive as they could be. Now I'm looking for the second half. The Rosenbergs had for half a century a most dignified, voluminous romance. Even in their late 80s, they emerged more frequently than honeymooners. Suddenly, her well-developed carriage, Hilda Rosenberg, reasonably rogue. Through her hospital pale fuchsia gown, she wore an attractive man-made striped tail and luxury dark red burgundy gown. Her thick curly white hair still retained the orange sparkles of brunette. Although in immense pain, she looked towards the heavens. I'm trying to skip some of it too. No hospital staff were present, okay. Okay, then I have a scene where she goes into the hospital, looks around, and basically doesn't find anyone, and she still talks about how much she enjoyed writing. Hilda now felt revered and respected. Despite the ordeal Hilda was facing, she again vowed to carry on and live. She had been hurt and violated, but no matter how battered and tortured, always vowed to improve her life and others. Hilda's head twirled and spun, and she went back to her childhood in the family cellar, which in effect had been one of the array of torture chambers her dad and brother had ruthlessly engulfed Hilda in. Physically and mentally for decades, their torment toward Hilda had virtually continued unabated. Hilda remembered when she was 3, her older twins hurting her very soul. They had molested through and grabbed a cherished, cross-eyed doll of hers. The cruel twins were only 6, sadistically tormented the disfigured yet sturdy doll, mimicking the way Hilda's abusive dad had often battered her. Sadistically and with glee, the twins seemed to hope young Hilda Rosenberg, their gorgeous baby sister, would ignore or betray the abused and beaten doll. Hilda then remembered Fred, her brother, viciously accosting the doll from Hilda's young innocent hands. 6-year-old Fred often molested and tormented Hilda in a relentless quest for power and control, shoving and tossing his baby sister to the floor as she clung to Sam the doll, her cherished doll for dear life. Fred then continued to kick Hilda in the head, ribs, and torso. Swiftly he accosted the doll from her trembling hands. As she lay in the corner bleeding, the twins Frida and Fred, in a vicious cutthroat slow motion, kept throwing the disabled doll to each other. Hilda cried out in agony, but at last none surprised, as they looked at the cross-eyed doll and shouted, "Birds of a feather flock together." The doll was mangled and more damaged, unique more than ever. But kind-hearted Hilda would not abandon the doll, although the doll was torn apart, beaten and severely shattered. Hilda adored every fiber of the doll and cherished its inner beauty. Even at the age of 3, she was kind-hearted. Young Mrs. Rosenberg clung and cherished and nurtured the doll. Gradually, she built the doll up and it became more beautiful than others. The fates would do the same for her. She would be that doll. Despite the abuse and neglect Hilda had faced, she vowed to reach out to others. As her mind returned to the present, she clutched a pendant of hers, which housed an age photo of her and her husband Clayton Joseph. Thanks for being here, doll. She again clutched the gemstone to her ample yet concealed bosom. Hilda then sat at a vacant silent chair, planning to write another article. She would continue to write and reach out to those in need. She would survive despite the silent conspiracy of many relatives and abusive others who had abused her and denied her pain. She would prevail in life, and despite the horrific abuse she faced, she would prosper. Mrs. Hilda Rosenberg would carry on, and with casual elegance she would survive. She would live. Okay, that's the end of it.
Thank you very much. Up next is Sam Tratton. He is a 77-year-old retired advertising, marketing, and computer graphics professional with a long history of writing for commercial clients and organizations. After retiring, he decided to write a memoir autobiography for his 3 daughters. His piece is in a final draft. His ventures, the people, the travels, the writing, have kept him active and engaged with the community of creative writers. Sam.
This is actually my second time at this. My first time, I didn't know what was happening. Today, I sort of realized what it is. We're a bunch of writers reading to one another because that's all who's here, essentially. The last time I was here, which was the first time, I had sweat running down inside my armpits. Concerned about, how I would come across. I went overtime, and Mark gave me this gesture, and I felt like I was at the Coliseum, the Christians and the Mayans, and I was on the losing side. But now I get it. We're here. I am now able to listen to other people speak, which I wasn't able to do the first time. I am here because I started a memoir / autobiography that a daughter asked me to write, my middle daughter, saying, Dad, we don't know anything about you before we knew you. So that started me. I went to a high school evening class led by Linda Speckles, and that was in what I wrote there, but you didn't read it.
Not here.
It's not there?
It's been edited.
It's been edited out. You don't want to talk about other people?
You used the same one as the last time, so I edited it out.
Well, that's okay. Linda told me that my writing that she had been coaching me in included a lot of poetry, so I was encouraged by that, and I decided that I would also go to a poetry class. And that was like 3 years later. And both of us still meet, the Linda Speckles biography class and the Jennifer Hendrick poetry class. And I think that's a good thing, because a man my age needs some kind of activity, something to keep going. So anyway, I'll get right into this. I will read until that thing goes off. And I tried to figure out where should I start in the biography, because there are, to me, some exciting parts, but they come later when I get a little bit older. But actually, it begins at the beginning, and it's still being written because I'm still here. Better go right to the beginning. Anyway, we'll start when I was born, which really is pretty dull stuff, but you have to start somewhere. Chapter 1, Born to War. In March 1940, America had yet to be drawn into World War II. I struggle alone and confined, breathing and swallowing amniotic fluid. I want freedom. I want to leave the lung, breathe fresh air. Betty wails and shrieks to expel me and to get relief from my thrashing. Sam Sr., in the day's fashion, paces the floor outside the birthing room's door. He, my father, 23, and in love with his bride, not yet 20, and married less than a year, were thought just about the right age to start a family. Now they may be thought to be barely more than children themselves. We somehow succeeded, each in our own way, on March 13. For the next few months, I lived without memory of anything but the smell of mother's milk, soiled diaper, baby powder, and the sound of my own cries for more. In that especially shrill newborn wail, I screamed, and here I can't duplicate that scream, but probably many of you know it. It's unbearable. It's it's the chalk on the wall kind of thing. E-I, E-I, E-I. See, I told you I couldn't do it. Waving my arms in the air and occasionally smile between sucklings. Smiling at visiting relatives, aunts and uncles, grandparents and their friends. America couldn't escape combat after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Our lives soon change in ways my own young mind will register only in retrospect. My world has me at its center. It revolves around me. By age 4, my age 4, I'm not stopping.
Security.
I'll go another half page. By age 4, the U.S. was deeply involved in combat. I had my parents' fears and their adult concerns with a nation at war, of shortages of heating fuel, of uncles putting on uniforms and going away to the Army and the Navy, of aunts forced to raise cousins alone. Gas is rationed, food is scarce. Though I cannot help but be affected by the adults' states of mind surrounding me, my own is still selfish enough to lack feeling for their concerns. Children are spared and protected from fear by their own self-centered view of the world. Empathy has no positive value to a toddler. I'm going to do one more paragraph. I am 2.5 when brother Frank is born in 1943. The sense of an infant returned. Betty's attention now shifts from me to him. Do you know about this kind of thing? Used to undivided attention, I am fortunately turned over increasingly to the care of my mother's mother, grandmother Sadie Kern, her sister, great Aunt Beatrice, and my mother's sister, Aunt Ann. Since I am the first of my grandparents' grandchildren in an increasingly swelling line of cousins that follows, my need for love and adoration remains satisfied. I'm snug and content. Dad Sam Sr., who calls me Sonny, still beams at me as I perch on his knee and provides his example of a good working man with a firstborn namesake.
Finally, we have Walt Trisna. Westchester has been his home for 32 years, nearly half his life. After spending 34 years as a scientist, he's now a writer of horror and science fiction. To write horror, he depends on his slightly warped mind. For science fiction, he likes to include some science facts in the fictional story to make the fiction more believable. He has a new novel, New Moon Rising, published by Melange Books, and a novella, Elmo's Sojourn, published by the same. Also, he has more than 20 short stories published in a host of periodicals. Walt?
going to start with the prologue and the blurb from my novel, give you a flavor of what the book's about. The Pacific Plate is one of the most geological active areas in the world, the site of nearly constant volcanic and earthquake activity. The Ring of Fire in the Pacific Ocean will soon escalate its impact on mankind. Two brothers, one a geologist and one a surfer, are at the center of this event that will change the Earth forever. In countries bordering the Pacific, needles on seismic charts form tiny squiggles and then move violently side to side. Moments later, the machines themselves began to move, fell from shelves as the buildings that housed them crumbled. Wade Randall stood on a hillside. He looked to where the Golden Gate Bridge once stood and surveyed the destruction. As far as he could see, columns of smoke issued from devastated buildings. People who survived wandered around in shock and horror. The world they once knew had come to an end. The piers of San Francisco no longer jutted into the ocean. They now stood in mud. The shore once close was now distant. God help the world, Wade said to himself. The prediction came true. It had been 2 years since events put into motion this cataclysm. Wade thought about his family and friends, now some distant, and his heart ached, wondering if they were still alive, wondering how many millions around the world had died. The predicted event seemed impossible even to him. Many chose not to heed the warning, and many died. The irony was that in the history of life on Earth, the irregular cycles of destruction by asteroids were now accepted as fact. Everyone looked to the sky for the next cataclysmic event to visit Earth. No one expected the next ruinous event on a scale unknown to man that would come from beneath the sea. Okay, now I'm going to read from my novella, Elmo Sojourn, and Elmo is a retired scientist from Los Alamos. He's working on an invention to travel through wormholes, and as much to his surprise, he succeeds. His first experiment results in something arriving in his cellar. What did you do now? Mildred asked. I completed my first experiment, Elmo answered and pointed to the plexiglass chamber. Through the mist, Mildred began to detect a shape. At first she thought it was a large fire hydrant, but then it began to move. The fire hydrant was mottled red and green, with skinny arms ending in suction cup fingers. The tiny legs also ended in suction cups. The creature's mouth resembled a funnel, which constantly opened and closed. It was breathing. The most peculiar aspect of this creature was its eye. It had only one, and it blinked constantly. As Elmo and Mildred talked, the eye followed their conversation, traveling from one to the other, as the eye physically moved around the perimeter of its head. Mildred watched as the eye moved from one side of the thing's head to the other. She giggled as she imagined a stadium full of these creatures following a tennis match, but soon got control of herself. Actually, the single eye wandering all over the alien's head was starting to give her the creeps. You can't keep it, she said. Thank you.
That concludes our program for this evening. Thank you again, everyone, for coming out. We do have flyers in the back for a writers group. If you have any questions, just ask anyone I've introduced as being part of our writers group, or myself if you really must, and we'd be happy to answer them. So everyone have a great evening, and thanks for coming out. And please eat Mark's cookies, or he'll cry, and he is an ugly crier.